These are African rhythms, passed down to us through ancient spirits. Feel the spirit, a unifying force. Come on, move with the spirit. Stand up, clap your hands. Groove with the rhythms, get down, get off.
There's nothing but give facelifts, make the space shift. I'm the same on the top as on the bottom. It's like making the A flip. I got dudes on corners who make A flips. One shot, have a dude making A flips into a handstand. Playing with the bandstand, began with the tan van. The fans are grand slams. Barry Bonds style, knife in it, I'm in the zone. Home run, watching the highlights when I'm getting home. Like yeah, that's me, hiding bats be. Walking with that cheese, you know how rats be.
I want to take the time to thank two important thinkers, organizers, political, social, cultural theorists to join us today, Brother Mukasa and Brother Obi Igbuna Jr., to really have a conversation about this current particular moment in the context of youth and student movements that are happening not only here in the United States, but also globally. And what I wanted to do today is to really do three things. The first thing is kind of get into a genealogy, moving from obviously Brother Mukasa, the deep impact and specifically, throughout, the 60s, and then moving into the 90s, Brother Obi. And of course, the idea is to have a cross conversation here. But, to develop a historical consciousness, there's three things that I think that provides a important platform for those who are engaged in this program and those who are engaging on the ground work. Again, whether here in the United States or globally, what does this moment mean? Because we obviously want to look at this historical context, but also we want to look at some lessons. And then the third thing we want to talk about, why is it important to have an internationalist perspective, linking the things that are happening on campuses and the target or the primary target, and linking it to, the violent repression that is happening in the longer genealogy of student movements here in the United States and again abroad, linking that to obviously the global condition. So as we begin, those three things, what does this moment mean? What are some lessons? And why is it important to have, this internationalist perspective, linking and finding continuities in this moment? So Brother Mukasa, what does this moment mean in the context from the perspective of someone who was on the ground, who was very, very involved in shaping and also organizing? And then, of course, we'll move to Brother Obi, and you can respond, with comments to each other as well. So, Brother Mukasa, what does this moment mean? How are we supposed to understand this moment in the historical genealogy of student movements?
Well, it's just an expression that our people are still oppressed, still in slavery, and that the people are frustrated and the people are trying to figure out how and where do we go from here. And that in my early days, we had to go in the back doors and sharecrop and face all the injustice that dehumanizing people. And that the people at one point, if you go back to Garvey days, Marcus Garvey organized world movement. And then you had great men like Paul Robeson and other voices that have spoke out here. But then when you, in my day, this people started sitting in saying they refused to go in the back doors and say yes, sir, and rebel against those kinds of things. And from that, movements were born, organizations were born, and we found ourselves confrontational with the oppressor. And that, so therefore I joined, helped put together a group called SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And that, we went to just tell our people to unite. And when we walked and marched and spoke out against the suppression, we faced guns, we faced bombs, we faced jail and all, other kinds of things that say to us that we were under colonialism or under segregation or under racism. and that we were not to be equal to nobody else in the world. So when we started fighting, it just led us to build organizations and create leaders that came out of that movement, from Malcolm to Martin and many others. And that so I just found myself in the middle of a big fire, a movement fire. And today we're still in that movement fire. So I'm definitely a soldier, but I became a soldier by just going out with so many others that pushed me and other people to the front to fight. And there are so many, even the people on the back line were great soldiers also. And many of them fought, jailed, shot, died, and never left their names. But so many heroes have struggled for our liberation and made the changes that we have today and continue to fight for those changes. And that's where I start there.
No, thank you, Brother Obi. Brother Mukasa is talking about this structural white supremacy that is rooted in imperial and colonial logic, right? So, as someone who was very, very integral and very, very involved with collectives of folk and establishing organizations, but also being trained by a lot of folk who were in the continuity of the movements that Brother Mukasa is talking about. How do we understand this moment, and what does this moment mean? And as we're moving into what we would call, obviously, the 90s or the late 80s going into the 90s?
Well, I'm privileged to say that Brother Mukasa was one of the people who trained me. Our point of entry, it comes down to capacity and demographic. As he so brilliantly articulated, the role of students and youth, it's a constant, especially for us culturally. Whether you want to use the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee as your backdrop, or the Southern Negro Youth Congress in the 1930s as your backdrop, whether you want to use South African Student Organization where Steve Biko gets his start, the General Union of Palestinian Students where Yasser Arafat gets his start, the University Federation of Students in Havana where Comandante Fidel Castro gets his start. It's a consistent thing throughout history, especially for us as Africans culturally. For us, it begins in 1989, where we found ourselves fighting the National Guard in 1989 in Virginia Beach. And in the following year, in 1990, we organized a boycott of Virginia Beach. Think about boycotting a HBCU tradition of that magnitude. But the fascism and repression drove us to do that. Of course, we're always guided by things that are going on at that particular juncture. So this is going on around the time that Mandela, simultaneous with the release of Nelson Mandela, simultaneous with the independence of Namibia, who gained their independence in 1990, which many people have a tendency to overshadow. And of course, we're called Generation X because our generation is recredited with considering Malcolm X the symbol of our resistance in the 90s. Heavy blending of nationalist sentiment, Pan-Africanist sentiment. So you had that going on. Then by 1992, we shut down the country for what is called the Rodney King Uprising. Oh, and in 1991, you have the independence of Eritrea. So we're inspired by that. And then in the 1990s, you begin to see African youth on the continent fighting against military neocolonialism. So you see Babangida and Abacha in Nigeria showing the door. You see Traore in Mali, who the CIA used to overthrow Modibo Keita, showing the door. You see more resistance to UNITA and Renamo, the CIA installations in Southern Africa. This is all being spearheaded by young people. And then, of course, the way we rebelled dealing with the Rodney King question, it reminded people of the 289 city rebellion that took place between 1965 and 1968. And then by 1995, you have a Million Man March. So you have this constant where national marches are organized to put the lid on our resistance, the same way that the March on Washington in 1963 was organized to put a lid on our resistance, and the same way that the suffrage parade in 1913 attempted to curtail the efforts of the National Association of Colored Women. So African resistance in its most organic sense, you see women at the forefront of the effort. you see churches at the forefront of the effort, and you see students and youth. So we just played our role, but those were the things that were influenced us. And then in 1991, we had a All-African Student Youth Conference, and Mukasa stands up in the middle of the floor because it's Easter weekend, and he's reminding us that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is founded Easter weekend at Shaw University in 1960, and there was no way we could leave that conference without an organization. And out of that, you had the Pan-African Student Youth Movement. And in the same way that you had the sit-ins happening, for us, it was administration building takeovers, starting with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County in 1988. UDC had one, my alma mater, Howard had one, numerous ones all over the country. So the need to have a permanent organizational structure, permanent organizational formation, this was, we adhere to the wisdom of those who were experienced and were willing to train us and take us through the process.
So Brother Mukasa, Obi opened, the doorway to us really understanding, the importance of developing an ideological development that is rooted in internationalism. He mentioned, briefly as you being one of his particular trainers and mentors. From the perspective, on the ground perspective, as you are training, as you are actually understanding the anti-colonialist movements that are happening, because again, Obi's inheriting, this genealogy that is being passed down, right? I think it's important to talk about that. What is some of the lessons, or how important was it as youth and young folks that you were involved with, helping start organizations, your travels to the continent of Africa as well, being able to understand the connections of the colonial situation in other countries and the colonial situation here in the United States?
Well, Malcolm X explained that. He said, if you don't understand what's going on in the Congo, or what's going on in Zimbabwe, or what's going on in Egypt, or what's going on in Palestine and other places around the world, then you can't understand what's going on in Alabama or what's going on in Mississippi. And otherwise, you got to look at the big picture. And when we began to look at our picture, we were able to see that the Black people, African people, were struggling in Ghana, in the Congo, where Patrice Lumumba was the prime minister, and the white people in the Congo had killed, colonialists has killed over 60 million Africans, cut their ears off, cut their feet off, cut their hands off because they didn't work hard enough. And we could link that up with the fact that we were in the outfields in Alabama picking cotton and being lynched and castrated and murdered and working for nothing. And then, so it became very clear that our struggle, wherever we are, was linked up with all the struggles in the world. And we began to just see them a little more. And now we got information centers, and we can see much more than what we just hear about or talk about. We see the United States slaughtering the people in Palestine. And it's very clear that Joe Biden is top gun in Palestine. Joe Biden is top gun, and Democrats and all of them saying is top gun in the Congo, top guns in killing people all over the world, passing nuclear bombs, spending billions on bombs and around the world, and won't spend a nickel or a dime on a hungry person under a bridge. And they still building slave ships, jails and prisons are nothing but slave ships. And they got these military bases all over the world. And that, so we still find ourselves in slavery. And that, when we just open up, we began to see a bigger picture. And that one of the things we worked out there in them cotton fields and worked in these different places and made basically nothing. But it become very clear that land is the basis of us being liberated. And now we debate what land are we fighting for. And it's very clear that our land is Africa. And in order for us to be liberated and free, we got to stop all of our natural resources that's coming out of the ground, going to Europe and other places in the world, and leaving us with nothing on our land. They steal peanuts, they steal mangoes. They got our people in the Congo out there picking diamonds and gold and coltan and cobalt, just like your grandmama and just like pick cotton. And that's so it is no different. This is one world system that's raping and robbing the world. They got one world army. Well, I know we faced a little sheriff in Alabama and Mississippi, but now we can see there's one world army that's controlled by, they're led by the United States, the UA or however, European armies. NATO is being controlled by the United States. And they use all these armies to commit crimes on the people of color and rape the land of the people. So all our little local struggles have to come together and build. All our movements, all our little gang members have to come together and build an army and have an ideological base that we have to give to the different little brothers and sisters and our people that say that we come together and now we use our youth to fight for us. Because if you fight one European nation, you got to fight them all. When we fought in Angola, we were fighting the whole of NATO and the United States. We fought in South Africa, we was fighting the United States and the whole of NATO. Whenever we fight anywhere in the world against these European colonialists that come to steal your land and murder your people, jail your people, and all the crimes they commit, you're fighting against all of them together. They put their armies together and fight. Now it's time for us to put our ideological forces together, put our children, our people together, our organization together, and our armies best we have, put them together, and then we can face the imperialist armies. And that when we talk about coming together, Marcus Garvey and Du Bois and many other leaders like Nkrumah and Lumumba and Sekou Touré and Amilcar Cabral, they call it Pan-Africanism. That means all us work together for the unity that we talk about. And we could name 1,000 different little purifiers that we are fighting in everywhere, because every acre of land that we live on in the world, we're oppressed, and every acre of land wherever we're oppressed, there are some forms of fighting, rebellion, and saying no to these people. In some places, we're able to say it stronger than we are in other places, but we're still saying it and doing the best. And I think now we're talking about how do we put these forces together and let all of us see that we're fighting one struggle for our liberation, and we're fighting against one world enemy. And Joe Biden is Top Gun.
And I'm also, and what is important in the context, because I also hear the importance of utilizing these platforms. So these encampments that are happening on college campuses, again, in a global context, can these be platforms? Can these be spaces where there can be a proliferation of putting these ideological forces that also leads to a particular objective, which is obviously removing the colonial structures that are still repressing, peoples in Haiti and peoples, in Cuba. All that.
Yeah,
go ahead.
definitely. I mean, it always has been and it always will be. Through this process, we've been working with young people on 3 campuses in particular. Brown, Ethan, a young brother named Ethan Levine, Cornell, a brother named Mamadou Taal, and at the University of Maryland, Adam Ganu. Adam Ganu is the president of the Palestinian Student Association and Muslim Student Association there. The challenge is, well, I think it's great because one of the most beautiful characteristics of history itself is the challenges that it imposes. And a lot of times when we talk about the great iconic figures that have profound influence on us, we give their analysis. We talk about their ideological impact, but we don't talk about the labor. So for people, as Malcolm X's 99th birthday is coming up, we must remind people that he was the first one to work with the Palestinians in our community. You can find the pictures of him with Ahmed Shukari, the first chairman of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And then when you know that in Libya in 1990, in the fall, you had the Worldwide African Anti-Zionist Front. And the objective of that was to show that Zionism was a direct enemy of African people. So right now, we want to because there's a difference between sympathy solidarity, and camaraderie. And what you see just by circumstance is taking on the character of sympathy. For Africans, we can't say we're in solidarity with the Palestinians until we've turned up our fight against Zionists. How can we do that? The fact that you've had all these police departments, the Capitol Hill Police Department, Detroit Police Department, Baltimore Police Department, Boston Police Department, New York Police Department, who have gone to Israel and have memorandums of understanding with the Israeli Defense Forces to be trained for the purpose of suppressing popular uprisings in this country. So we need to sit down with the African American Mayoral Association, the National Conference of Black Mayors, and the World Conference of Mayors, and get sworn statements from them on record that no mayors will allow their police forces to go to Israel for training. That's how we can complement the fight. There were 47 Israeli embassies on the African continent. Now it's down to 12. And because of pressure, the African Union stripped Zionist Israel of their observer status. But now it's about us bringing up Israel on criminal charges for their crimes on the African continent. The bombing of Egypt/Kemet in 1967. The fact that Israel's tried to stop Algeria and Tunisia from being recognized as self-determining nations once they got their independence. And the military assistance that they gave to the Portuguese in Angola, in Mozambique, that they gave to the British and the Rhodesians in Zambia, what's called South Africa, and Zimbabwe. So their crimes against the African continent, and the fact that if you're doing Cuba work, if you've done any, and you're against the blockade on Cuba, you already know the only other nation arrogant enough and stupid enough and hateful enough and barbaric enough to want to maintain the blockade on Cuba is Zionist Israel. So we must fight Israel on a multitude of fronts, but Africans must match the resistance of Palestinians based on crimes and atrocities they've committed against us. And if we're not doing that, it's well-intentioned cheerleading at best. And there's no room for pom-poms on the battlefield. But as usual, it's just about understanding our issues in the scheme of this. A month and a half ago, Joe Biden, who was a co-sponsor of the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, he relaxed the sanctions on Zimbabwe, which he imposed back in 2001 for them reclaiming 70% of their most arable and resourceful land and giving it to 350,000 families in a nation where the average family consists of 6 people, taking it from 4,500 commercial farmers of European ancestry. So the same way you couldn't get us to applaud if you loosened the noose on our neck when you were lynching us, if you loosened the shackles on our ankles and our necks and our wrists when we were being brought here and dropped off all over the Americas. So loosening the sanctions on Zimbabwe doesn't mean anything to us. And the only challenge that we have is Africans and Palestinians can't let anyone or anything come in between them, like the United States Agency for International Development, where you now have these intelligence agencies taking a liberal slant, using humanitarianism to bring about regime change, using philanthropy to bring about regime change. Because at the same time, he's planning regime change in Cuba, regime change in Venezuela, regime change in Nicaragua, which has the largest African population in Central America. And the fact that in Azania, South Africa, the African National Congress, who has the distinction of being the only liberation movement in Azania, South Africa that did not join the Worldwide African Anti-Zionist Fund. The PAC was front and center. AZAPO was front and center. But the fact that you have the Brenthurst Foundation now, which is the pet project of the Oppenheimers, on the ground in Azania, South Africa, working in partnership with the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies, which is the University of Tel Aviv. So we have to tell the ANC they have to break that relationship and break that tie. So what these encampments serve as is a platform to intensify the activity and to give the activity the ideological direction. So we're maximizing potential, whether it's an encampment, whether it's a teach-in, whether it's a private meeting, but our targets have to be definitively clear. And our artists and our entertainers who like the finer things in life, they love jewelry. They call it bling in the hood. They need to go take their jewelry back to their appraiser and find out if it came through Israel before it showed up in New York, before it showed up in Zale, before it showed up in Tiffany's or wherever. If it came through Israel, we're demanding that they take that jewelry back. So until we are fighting Zionism based on their crimes against Africans, past and present, then we're just showing that we're compassionate, which is nothing new to the world. We're showing that we're well-intentioned. And I'm not talking about these young people, because to say that Zionism is worse in 2024 than it was in 2014, than it was in 2004, than it was in 1994, 1984, 1974 is not accurate. To say that Netanyahu is worse than Golda Meir, is worse than Moshe Dayan, is worse than Ben-Gurion, that would be false. But we can use the momentum of our resistance, how we fought them, and expose the fact that the pro-Zionist entities in our community, like the Harry Belafontes of the world, like the Bayard Rustins of the world, were confused, were wrong, and manipulated. And the best way to correct the mistakes of the past is to expose the contradictions of the past, but not to come off as an opportunist expert, not to come off as a cheerleader, but for the purpose of intensifying this resistance in every shape and form we can have that take place.
You know, Brother Mukasa, this notion of intensifying the struggle, but also as the intensification of the repression comes in, we see a lot of the encampments being raided by the police forces. Of course, you're in the South, particularly, I believe in Atlanta or outside Atlanta. We're looking at Cop City. We're looking at the propagation of cop cities. But before we kind of unpack this, this intensification, because I think the intensification process that Obi is laying out is very, very important. You were very, obviously involved in and knew of the repression of the state on students in Jackson State, Orangeburg massacre, North Carolina A&T. Could you talk about the importance of understanding? Because again, the purpose of this program is to provide a platform for developing a historical consciousness that leads to an intensification or a cultivation of a process to address these cyclical processes of colonialism. Could you talk about, we're looking at the police repression in UCLA and of course up in New York. This is not new to particularly HBCUs, right? Particularly students, looking at Jackson State, Orangeburg massacre. Could you talk about, that particular instance and what lessons can be learned from that?
Well, we could go back and they shot up Jackson State and killed students on campus. They shot up Texas Southern. They shot up Fisk University. They shot up Tennessee State, murdered all them people in Orangeburg and all around the world. Wherever we speak out, they come to kill us and murder us. So all that's nothing new. But at the same time, our youth and young kids, high school kids, are under attack by the prison industrial complex. And they got all our children in these jails and prisons, got their fathers in jails and prisons. And these are just regular old cotton picking street people, working people, and we're under attack. And it is worldwide, and it's in every country and every village around the world. Imperialism is flourishing, and that they have pushed us to a position that we have no other choice but to fight to get our land or to fight to solve our problem. And that one of the things that we have to teach our people is organization, because we got so many people that can break all this down intellectually, but they don't know how to go out and organize like SNCC did or like Marcus Garvey has done. And that I think that we have not trained our people to be organizers. And this is what we need now, people to go to the basketball courts, go to the nightclubs and organize and teach in those plays, turn them into schools, go into the streets. And one time we knocked on neighborhood doors, I guess just like the Jehovah's Witness knock on there to spread whatever they be spreading. We have to now have contact, direct contact, eye to eye with the people. And we have to go inside these high schools or outside the high schools or wherever we can get close to these students, because the military is operating on them schools and they organizing our children and putting them into the army, tricking them into the military and sending them to different parts of the world to be killed and to kill and to fight for imperialism. And that if we don't organize for our own children and people, then who gonna do it? We got to go into these churches and make the churches and teach the churches what it is they're fighting against. Teach them what the real devil is, imperialism and Zionism. Teach them all these little people out here that's going to vote. We made it where they could vote now. We fought and took bombs and killing and lynchings to make it where they could vote. But remember now, it was the Democrats that was throwing the dynamite at us. It was the Democrats that was lynching and killing and killed Cheney, Swan, and Goodman. It was the Democrats' time when they blew Martin Luther King's mouth off. It was the Democrats when they killed Malcolm X and all that. And they all operated one force. And that Biden and this guy Trump, they getting ready to have a debate. The only thing they're going to be debating is who killed the most Indians. Who going to kill the most Indians? Who killed the most Africans? Who going to drop the most bombs? Who done raped and robbed most of the people in the world? And that's the only debate they're having. And who gonna carry colonialism? Who gonna steal the most diamonds and gold? Who gonna assassinate the most people in the world? Who gonna take over run all the people off their land in South and Central America? Who gonna beat the hell out of them at the borders and starve them and kill them? That's the only thing them punks gonna argue. So we need to now begin to educate and teach our people. We need people that would go to our people and teach them. And we need people that would go out and say, we're going to take this money from these banks or wherever you can get it from, and we're going to help fund organizers and real organizations that's fighting for the people. Everybody got to make some sacrifice for the people, man. You just can't sit back and talk about it. You got to show that you're in the streets. You got to show that you're out there talking to people and converting people and answering the questions and raising the questions with people that they have on their mind. They're looking for somebody to come to them. Most people ain't on the social media. Most people ain't whatever. They need somebody to talk to, and that we need to make sure that we have organizers out here. And now there are some organizations that's claiming and want to be organizers, and this is what we need. And that's one of the things that I think we missed in the 80s and 90s. We gave them the ideological theories, but we didn't give them the technical ways of going into communities and converting and raising conscience of those people. Back in the day, we had to put together freedom schools. We had to put together a whole lot of songs and that songs about freedom and liberation and whatever. And we had to educate people and change their mind. This is the kind of thing that we got to do. We need organizers, and we need organizers like never before. And so many people, Dr. King say, get caught up in the paralysis of the analysis. Anyway, however you put it together, you get paralyzed by just sitting down thinking you right and having all the answers and not being able to go out and do nothing to organize people.
One of the reasons why I thought having this particular conversation, again, to provide a disruption, but also a rich platform for developing a historical consciousness, is not in the context that we're trying to just basically talk about history as something that is in the past, but something that actually we can extend the work of those who have come before. We can extend the work of the Brother Mukasas, who were very integral, because you're talking from, and I want people to understand when you're saying organizing, that you're saying that kind of like a matter of factly, but we also have a deep history here, right? You are one of, principal organizers and helping folk to really understand the importance of the technicalities, the strategy, the deep level of consistency and the scope of organizing local to national, but also international. And that becomes important because you can see that in the conversation. Brother Obi, you definitely can respond to anything that was said. But one of the things I think is important to kind of tease out is what Brother Mukasa is talking about, organizing into organizations or developing institutions. You mentioned Brother Obi, the Worldwide African Anti-Zionist Front, which is to be honest with you, it's not even in the conversation, in the dominant discourse, that there was obviously an attempt to a longer genealogy. Again, Brother Mukasa talked about Palestine and the Middle East and the African connections very early, and we can go back there, but have a part two. But talk about, this notion, this idea of that.
Well, what happened was at that particular point for us in the 90s, our point of entry into anti-Zionist work was Libya. And like we tell people now, and understanding that 14 years ago, 500,000 Libyans were slaughtered, maybe more, as a result of NATO and U.S. imperialism, the Obama administration's illegal terrorist invasion of Libya. So we say to people, if you put a dead Libyan and a dead Palestinian next to each other, you couldn't tell which one was which. And they're definitely being slaughtered for the same reason by the same forces. And when you take a look at how brilliant that was for Muammar Gaddafi, Colonel Gaddafi, to bring Africans from all over the world together to Libya to deal with the Zionist question. And this is why we tell people, when you look at anti-Zionist resistance, there's a pre-Durban and a post-Durban, because most of the efforts you see now come after 2001, where you had the United Nations Conference Against Racism, Xenophobia, and Other Related Intolerances. And many people went to Azania because Bush said they could not go. And if Palestine was on the agenda, if our captivity was on the agenda and reparations was on the agenda, U.S. imperialism would do everything they can to turn things upside down. So in all actuality, people did not go because of solidarity with the Palestinians. They went to thumb their nose up at Bush. And this is many people who see life itself in the scheme and the lens of the never-ending lover's quarrel between Democrats and Republicans. But the positive for us is to remind people, once again, you said, putting this in historical context, it is Harry Truman, a Democrat, who gave life to Zionist Israel, with, of course, Ralph Bunche out of our community doing the dirty work. When we talk about Cuba, it is Kennedy who imposed the blockade. The Congo is getting a lot of conversation now, and we want to give a shout out to our comrades and the friends of the Congo who've been carrying that work for a very long time. So you go back to the conversation between Eisenhower and Kennedy. Eisenhower said, by all means, bury Lumumba. Kennedy says, don't bury him, but because that would make him a martyr. But under no circumstances should he return to power. So both Kennedy and Eisenhower were for regime change in the Congo. They just had a different methodology in play. Was Reagan worse when he was the rat in Hollywood for J. Edgar Hoover, diming out people who had ties to the Communist Party who were or were ideologically attracted to the Communist Party? When he was a Democrat governor, destroying the Black Panther Party for self-defense was objective number one? Or was he worse as a Republican president when Maurice Bishop was assassinated in the New Jewel movement? So these are the things that we can use this opportunity. I remember Mukasa and I 10 years ago were walking down the street in Selma with Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. We told them your worst nightmare is if the masses of our people do voter education and begin to look at our historical relationship to both the Democrats and Republicans. And but you shouldn't be bothered by that, because more people will want to join the Rainbow Coalition and the National Action Network as opposed to voting for whoever is running for president at that time, or who's running for Congress, or who's running for the Senate. Targeting key demographics of our community is important. As you know, Brother James, our focus is the children. And we teach through our children, not to our children, because when you teach through the children, you attract the mothers, you attract the fathers, the men of quality in their lives, you attract the grandparents. And before you know it, you're moving the community. And then you're moving the teachers, you're moving the librarians, you're moving the bus drivers, you're moving the mail women, you're moving the mailmen. You're moving the janitors, you're moving the custodians, all because you target children. So there's cultural warfare going on at the same time. So if we are able to come up with, and then of course, Brother Mukasa mentioned the prisons. Let us not forget that the police, anytime we stand up against naked police terrorism, somebody in our community is going to say, don't do it at the expense of dealing with gun violence or violence prevention. But the violence prevention movement in our community has never aggressively challenged the police in this country and the military in this country for arming the guns, arming our neighborhoods. As a matter of fact, 7 years ago in Selma, Alabama, a Caucasian woman who ran the evidence locker got exposed giving guns to young people in Selma. Selma today only has 20,000 people, but it's the 8th most violent city in North America. So that is to say that the same police department that trained Bull Connor and trained Jim Clark 60 years later is giving 9mm and choppers and derringers to our children in Selma. And the same thing is going on in Chicago. The same thing is going on in DC. The same thing is going on in Baltimore. And at this moment, Africans in Mexico are talking about suing the United States government, saying that 225,000 U.S. manufactured guns show up in Mexico on an annual basis, and that is responsible for the cycle of violence in Mexico. Here we are, 30 years removed from the United States acknowledging that they put crack in our community to overthrow the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And we never, as a community, have joined hands with Africans in Nicaragua, Africans in Colombia, Africans in Honduras, and the indigenous people in Bolivia, Peru, and Honduras, who can show you what the original intent of the coca plant is. So we're talking about biological warfare. We're talking about traditional police warfare. And we are in a capacity. Another thing is where you are. So those of us who are organizers in Washington, D.C., just by circumstance, anytime we want to, we can put these issues on the world stage, not abandoning the local issues of the people in Southeast, Northeast, Northwest, or Northeast, but tying it into Colombia, tying it into Cuba, tying it into Venezuela, tying it into Africa, tying it into Palestine, tying it into whatever we want to, whenever we want to. The biggest challenge is just the maintenance of the resistance, because we can't expand on the resistance if there's no maintenance. And what we have is temporary, what people call spontaneous, but it's not spontaneous, it's temporary. And the biggest challenge we have is we see resistance with endless potential all the time, but the ability to maintain it will be determined by projects, campaigns, and initiatives that are created from us from the ground up, with no blood money from the enemy, nobody who, as George Soros is buying our organizations the same way our ancestors were purchased as auctions. That's what's going on now. So bribery cannot be a factor. Manipulation cannot be a factor. Everything we come up with has to be organically from us, from our resistance from the ground. It cannot have the enemy's footprints, fingerprints, or dollars on it. If you're financed by the enemy, don't you dare come around us telling us you're there to intensify a fight against the enemy. If George Soros feeds you and clothes you, if the MacArthur Foundation feeds you and clothes you politically, don't come around us acting. You're bluffing at best if you are being financed by the enemy right now. And at a time where our young people are talking about generational wealth, we say what Frantz Fanon said, wealth is not the fruit of labor, but the result of organized, protected robbery. So it's not about the accumulation of wealth, but it's the utilization of wealth. What are we going to do with the wealth? And the best thing we can do with our wealth is finance our resistance. So all these organizations that are in the pockets of the enemy, you're contaminating our space.
And
at
also,
this historical moment.
And also, you just spoke of Selma. Selma is where we went down and we fought for the right to vote, got beat and all that kind of thing. And today, where people made the greatest prices for registering to vote and trying to register to vote, they're the poorest people probably in Alabama. They're being starved to death. Genocide is being committed on them. Every business has been taken away, and the houses are poorer now than it was 50 years ago. And the people in Selma are being run out. And every year, the enemies, the Democratic Party, pay for a bunch of Uncle Tom doctors and whatever to come down to Selma, and make a half program dance and do their buck dancing and march across that old bridge, Ever Pelson Bridge, and they mad at me because I told the people we need to burn the bridge down or blow it up because it ain't nothing but a symbol of oppression where they beat us and beat our people down, made Martin Luther King turn back in a disgraceful way. And that the bridge ain't nothing. And that Uncle Tom be marching across the bridge, waving American flags and all that. And that they won't invite me to come back down there because I tell the truth. I ain't on their salary. I ain't on their payroll. And that Selma is a symbol of oppression, just like Palestine, just like South Africa, just like the Congo and every other place that we are fighting in the world today. And that we need to expose these Uncle Tom from Sharpton to the rest of them.
And Kamala Harris calling for a ceasefire in Selma is the equivalent of J. Edgar Hoover calling for the ending of COINTELPRO after Malcolm X and Martin Luther King got assassinated. It's fraudulent at best. And you can't talk about a poor people's campaign if you're not talking about the fact that there are 3,174 billionaires on this planet, at the same time, there's 709 million people living on $1.90 a day, and 409 million of them live on the African continent. So those of you who are going to Africa carrying the banner of neocolonialism, those of you going to Ghana and have it looking like a HBCU homecoming today, you better go back and look at history. If you say that you're a repatriate, if you're not moving like Julian Mayfield, if you're not moving like Tom Feelings, if you're not moving like Maya Angelou used to move, if you're not moving like Leslie Alexander Lacey and Jim Lacey, if you're not there standing in front of U.S. embassies in every place where you are, then you might as well go into the U.S. embassy and form a memorandum of understanding with them, because you're their partner. You're with Rosa Whitaker. You're with the Chamber of Commerce. You're with the Corporate Council on Africa. You're with the U.S. Africa Military Command. You're with the United States Agency for International Development. You're with the National Endowment for Democracy. You're with the National Democratic Institute. You're with the International Republican Institute. You are a partner, which makes you complicit. So whether it's military neocolonialism, whether it's civilian neocolonialism, whether it's, I was in Selma a couple of months ago, and before we went up to the podium, the MC said, be careful what you say. You don't want to mess any of these people's money up. And this factor of bribery, and they felt comfortable saying that to me, knowing we were going to bring up Cuba, knowing we were going to bring up the Congo, knowing we were going to bring up Zimbabwe, knowing we were going to bring up Eritrea, knowing we were going to bring up Selma, knowing we were going to bring up Uniontown, knowing we were going to bring up Colombia, knowing we were going to bring up Venezuela. This is the type of thing that happens. So if you are saying that you are on the front line, and the last thing I'm going to say is what we want the young people to know especially is make a distinction between visibility and impact. You can be seen for 24 hours a day, seen on TikTok, seen on Facebook, seen on Instagram, seen on Zoom, and you are impacting nothing. And the alternative is you are rarely seen. You define when you are seen, how you are seen, and you can impact millions. And that is how we look at the quality of our resistance.
All these Uncle Toms ain't doing nothing but apologizing to Zionism, kissing Zionism feet, apologizing to the Democratic Party, which is the #1 killer of people around the world today. And these Uncle Toms ain't nothing but apologetic to these people. And they scared of the people that tell the truth. That's why back in the 60s, we had to pass out tapes on Malcolm X and give out to people and just talk about Malcolm X to everybody, because nobody would say nothing about him on TV. Nobody would say nothing to him about it on the radio that was against the law. Nobody would say nothing about him in church. Everybody would tell you, call Malcolm X's name. Even the Uncle Tom would tell you, shut up, don't use that name. But they tried to poison Malcolm X's name. But through grassroots movement, we put Malcolm X out there. We got T-shirts, we made posters, we just put it everywhere, until today we made Malcolm from a grassroots level one of the most loved men in the world. And that these Uncle Toms that they paying for, putting out front, trying to do everything they can to hush people that would tell the truth. And how they gonna tell me I can't come to Selma? And I walked across the bridge right in front of King to fight. John Lewis helped organize it. And this year they said, you can't come down because you talk too bad about the white folk. You talk too bad about the Democrats. You talk too bad about the Republicans. You want to burn the bridge down. You see the bridge as a bridge of oppression. And they walk across waving the flag, grinning and buck dancing for the Democratic Party. Damn the Democratic Party. Damn Zionism. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
And if we want to complement the divestment program, then the Peace Corps should be run off Howard University's campus. The students should go in front of the Bunch Center and take a look at who their partners are. So anywhere that you have a HBCU and the Peace Corps has a presence, the CIA has a presence, there's a ROTC on your campus. These are the type of things that you can do to complement this resistance. And then that way, then that way, run them off the campus, expose what they've done on the campus, go into your departments and find out who your professors are. And if your professors have ties to these intelligence agencies in Europe, these intelligence agencies in Africa, these intelligence agencies in Latin America, then you know your work is cut out for you, but the work can be done. and there's nothing that can stop you because all resistance has direction. It's going to come down to what our focus is, what our target is, and then we can stop hiding behind ideology and begin to deal with strategical and tactical focus, which is methodology, at a time where it appears that there's strategical and tactical bankruptcy, because there are people who know that they're out of ideas, but for the purpose of staying relevant, they'll jump on a platform and give you the impression that they know more than they know and they're doing more than they're doing. But the beautiful thing about this historical moment is it's all going to come out. The smoke is going to clear, and you're going to see who labors. Along 70 years ago, there was a documentary called Who Speaks for the African? Of course, we then said Who Speaks for the Negro? In 2024, moving forward, it shouldn't be who speaks for us, because that answer is everybody, because everybody's got an opinion, from the non-involved to the very involved, to the semi-involved to the intensely involved. The question is who labors on our behalf, who sacrifices on our behalf, who serves on our behalf, because we have allowed commentators and public intellectuals to contaminate this space. And it's so contaminated that public intellectuals have this space looking like public bathrooms, and you know how filthy they are. Forgive the visual, but we had to tell you what we're facing. But it's nothing that we can't overcome. So if you are interested in labor, if you are interested in service, if you are interested in organized resistance, we promise you that our paths will cross. But if you're interested in just proclaiming that you're an expert on a particular historical period, an expert on a particular individual, your time is running out.
Also, the military industrial complexes in Africa. They got a training camp right down there in Fort Benning, Georgia, called the School of the Americas. That's where they train deaf squads.
They changed the name Africa to throw us off, but it's the same place. It's now the Western Hemisphere Center for Strategic Studies.
They go to these countries and get military, bring them there and train them how to torture and kill their own people. Just like the so-called Israel's doing. They got almost 50 different armies throughout the continent of Africa with drones stationed in Africa, ready to drop bombs on the Africans. And this is what the United States is doing around the world. And these Uncle Toms are apologizing and scratching and itching. And I remember back in the 60s when we went down south, they had Africans running around. The Uncle Tom would look at these white folks, these murdering white folks, and look them right in the eye and scratch and say, y'all white folks sure is good to us colored people. And that's what they're saying to Biden today. Mr. Biden, you sure is good to us colored people, where they kill and murder in Angola, in Mozambique, in the jails, in the prisons all over the world. Children are being killed and murdered. That's what the United States is doing right now as we talk.
And Brother Mukasa, they were angry at us last year for circulating that picture of Vladimir Putin standing next to Emerson Mnangagwa and Samora Machel in Mozambique.
And also they put the Uhuru movement leaders in jail for going to Russia and being friends with Russia and talking good about Russia and telling the truth about Putin. And Russia's helping the Africans. Russia giving them weapons, training, giving them toothpaste, just gave 150 buses to Nicaragua. The United States been dropping bombs on them for the last 50 years. Gave them buses, gave them toothpaste, and give them toilet paper, all kinds of things that they need just for survival daily. And these are the kind of roles that Russia's been playing around the world. And we thank Russia, and we take the position of what's his name said we would never fight Russia for the United States.
Paul Robeson.
Paul Rose, we'd never fight Russia for the United States. We'd never believe nothing that the United States say about Russia, China, or nobody else in the world, Vietnam, Korea, Kwame Nkrumah, Lumumba, Sekou Touré. None of them would never side against nobody on this earth.
Unless you want to be like Jackie Robinson, though.
Oh, Jackie Robinson.
And that's why we keep telling people that Black excellence has a militant twin called African resistance. And it's time for you to listen to the twin. And they're Siamese twins, too. So you can't ignore one and give your undivided attention to the other. And you've overindulged in Black excellence. It's time to give African resistance a try. And it will be more advantageous to you than you could ever imagine. So we thank you for your time with our time with you today. It's always an honor to be with you, Brother James. You keep doing what you're doing.
And also that all these Uncle Toms is getting the salaries from these folks, and all that. They gonna send them out here to fight us. They gonna send these police chiefs out here, just like to send the Uncle Tom mayor to beat the people up for marching against Palestine, just like to send that Uncle Tom mayor up in New York to beat and jail them children up there in New York for speaking out against Palestine. And all these police chiefs we done fought and put on the police forces, they gonna send them to fight and kill us. And they got African armies that they have trained to go kill their own people, where the Europeans and the big multinational corporation continue to take the diamonds, the gold, the oil, the silver, the copper, the pearl, the cobalt, the manganese, and everything out of Africa, and make the European powers or the imperialist powers rich and leave the masses of the people poor. And I want to thank the Palestinians for being willing to give their life where all the other Palestinians can live. I want to thank the Palestinians for being the vanguard of the world, to show that they would have to fight and die for the liberation of our people. And we here, right here, that's talking right now, we may have to give all our lives up just for Africa to be able to live. But the
Palestine is in Africa. It's in North Africa.
That's right.
So to all the frauds and hypocrites who say that they're too consumed with work in Africa, that's why they won't stand with the Palestinians. We know how fraudulent that is, because you're not on the front line fighting for Eritrea. You're not on the front line fighting for Zimbabwe. You're not on the front line fighting for Burkina Faso. You're not on the front line fighting for Mali. So you might as well get baptized in North Africa, because whether it's the north of Africa, Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, Western Africa, any harassment by imperialist forces, we are obligated by history to fight them tooth and nail. So anybody who wants to use the Arab presence in Palestine as an excuse not to fight Zionism, well, come see us. We'll show you when to fight Zionism and how to fight Zionism. But if you're not fighting at all and you're just hiding on YouTube, hiding on TikTok, giving the impression you do more than you do and you know what more than you know, our paths will cross very soon, and it's going to be very uncomfortable for you.
And I want to say that all these folks up there in them big white universities, we picked up guns and got them up there. You wouldn't be at Cornell University if we hadn't picked up guns and AK-47 and took over Cornell University and demand African studies. And talk about Brown University, I went up in Brown University, didn't have now African studies program, didn't have hardly nothing up in there for us. When I left that town, the whole city was on fire, including Brown University, the high school, the junior high school. And that's how they got all this, the African Studies Department, and talking about what they apologizing for slavery and all that kind of stuff. Cause we took it, and then they went out and got Uncle Tom's and gave them doctor's degrees, and they go in there and pretend that they represent the African people. But their job is to keep African children from speaking out. And I'm saying the African Studies Department, the Black Student Union, we put you on them campuses to fight. Now go and start fighting. Join the liberation movement. Build encampments, demand and speak up for Palestine. Educate people what's going on in the Congo. Teach them about the killing and murder and mass genocide that's going on in the Congo. Support our brothers in West Africa that's fighting for the liberation, running the French imperialists off our land, Mali and Timbuktu and Chad and Burkina Faso, where they murdered that little nice young man that the only crime he committed was trying to give houses and food and medicine and a little schooling to his people, and use Burkina Faso for his people to help his people and stop the exploitation of France. And the France used the Uncle Tom to go and kill him. And this is what they have done throughout Africa, is kill our leaders, murder our leaders, only because they want to feed, clothe, and help our people and solve the problems of our people. Our people are suffering now, and they're suffering more now than ever before. We're being put out to houses right here in the United States. They're passing federal laws. They got millions of empty houses and millions of people living outdoors. And now it's a federal law against you going.
All park lovers out there, to all the citizens of Wakanda and Zamunda, our sister Assata Shakur is still on these pigs' terrorist list. She has to come off of it. There's a $2 million bounty on her head for walking the path she's walked. That has to end too. And Cuba being on their terrorist list, it's a case of mistaken identity. They're mistaken in Cuba with Israel. They're mistaken in Cuba with Chile under Pinochet, Nicaragua under Somoza, the Congo under Mobutu. Bukasa under the Central African Republic, Egypt/Kemet under Mubarak. It's a case of mistaken identity. Cuba should not be on their terrorist list. Assata Shakur, there should not be a $2 million bounty on her head, and she is not a terrorist. And this is the Obama administration that put her on that terrorist list. So all these people who go back and forth to Cuba, that this is your responsibility to make sure that you become part of this fight. We just spent time with the students at Montgomery College. Thanks to our brother Gus Griffin. We know he's probably going to be listening to this. We then went to Trinity, thanks to our sister Dr. Kimberly Monroe. We then had a reunion with Dr. Sack Kondo at Baltimore City Community College. We're headed to Medgar Evers College. And this is how you fight Zionism. If you fight for Cuba, you're hurting Israel. If you fight for Venezuela, you're hurting Israel. If you're fighting for Zimbabwe, you're hurting Israel. If you're fighting for Zimbabwe, you're digging the coffin for Israel. And it was Sekou Touré that told us that imperialism will find its grave in Africa. So all we need is the shovels. All we need to do is make sure that the soil is right. And this is our interpretation of climate change. And I'm glad that Brother Mukasa talked about these college campus professors, because we give them platforms. So be like Dr. Pope, James Pope, be like Tasneem Siddiqui. Don't be one of them that just come on our platforms, and then when we try to get in touch with you to follow up, we can't find you. Hide and seek is a child's game. I stopped playing that with my son when he was 3 years old. He's 5 years old. So I'm not going to play that with any 40-year-olds. We're not going to play that with any 50-year-olds and any 30-year-olds. And being a watchdog on your campus, where you're the buffer between the students and the community and the administration, that's not an option either. And some of you parade around as experts. And then when you see us in public, you whisper to us that we're doing the real work, but you try to keep us off those campuses by any means necessary, putting a negative spin on Brother Malcolm's concept of intensifying resistance. But once again, you're not going to be able to maintain this. So we're going to distinguish the professors who support the struggle and are part of the struggle from those of you who pay lip service to the struggle and have made a science out of doing that, mastered the art of doing that. But when it's all said and done, you want to practice social distancing like you did during Corona. You don't want to be anywhere near the movement. You don't want to be anywhere near the resistance, but you want to pretend. So you hide on your podcast. You hide in your classroom. You're either going to have to be part of the struggle, really, or you're going to have to move to the side. People will not be deceived by masquerades. And many of you who spend your time on platforms, your analysis is really an apology. You've run out of ideas. You don't know what to do next because you spend all your time on the podium. But in the prisons, you're not there. In the streets, you're not there. In the pool halls, you're not there. With the children, you're not there. You're conveniently absent when duty and responsibility calls. So if you think that you can come and hide behind these platforms and try to divert attention away from real work being done, real organizing being done, you have another thing coming. And it's going to take a harmonious blend of Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, those who are left from the 60s, and you're not going to continue to be able to hurdle over the 90s because you know how potent that generation was. We had fraternities and sororities making kente cloth out of their colors. We made a state, as a matter of fact, at UDC, we organized the press conference to give Muammar Gaddafi and the Libyans the opportunity to respond to the accusation that they were behind the bombing of the Pan Am plane in Lockerbie, Scotland. And as soon as we did that, the director of student activities at UDC said that Miners Teachers College, which is now owned by Howard, which used to be our old building, was shut down for renovations because we were using that based on its strategic space being in the middle of Northwest Washington. And we organized that press conference, and Bill Kunstler came, and Noam Chomsky came, and all the friends of Libya came. But this was to send a statement to the Zionists. So we're letting you know we've been fighting them before September of last year. We've been fighting them since 1897. We were fighting them in 1917 when the Balfour Declaration was created. We were fighting them during World War I, World War II. We were fighting them during the anti-colonial movement. So this is a continuation of the fight. And then we're going to have to fight them to make sure that they don't resurrect once they've been destroyed. And we said destroyed. Bury them next to Portuguese East Africa. Bury them next to southern and northern Rhodesia. Bury them next to the Gold Coast. Bury them next to Upper Volta. Bury them next to all the other colonialist installations. Why do they think they should have imperialist privilege? And beware of the Zionist agents who have infiltrated these encampments who are talking about ceasefire. They're not doing it because they're angry at Palestinian babies and women and men being slaughtered. They're calling for a ceasefire so Israel can exist for another 24 seconds, another 24 minutes, another 24 hours. They've been Zionists from day one. And that's why even within the peace movement in this country, the response to Zionist Israel has always been casual. But it's been us as Africans who have pushed an anti-Zionist line from the very beginning, whether it was Malcolm who did it, whether it was Mugabe and ZANU-PF who did it, whether it was Augustino Neto and MPLA who did it. Don't forget that it was Ahmed Sekou Touré and the Democratic Party of Guinea who pushed for the resolution Zionism is Racism 3379 at the UN that the Bush administration pushed out in 1992. This fight has been going on. The same Zionist Congressman Tom Lantos, who denounced Khalid Muhammad, is the same one who took Barack Obama by his leash and had him attack Zimbabwe. He's the same one that made the Congressional Black Caucus come 5 votes short of voting unanimous for the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act. And the reason that he hated ZANU-PF, the reason he hated Frelimo, the reason he hated MPLA, because if you go back and look at the Organization of African Unions, African Unity, now the African Unions Liberation Committee, when they would give updates on the armed struggles in Namibia and Mozambique and Angola and Zimbabwe, Yasser Arafat would come personally and give updates on the Palestinian struggle. We've been together. But at the same time, you had Harry Belafonte, who used to high step like Deion Sanders when he sang the song Hava Nagila, which celebrated the Balfour Declaration, and he bragged he did more to popularize that song than any other entertainer in the United States. The reason Bayard Rustin has a movie on Netflix, and many of you feel it's about time that he gets his credit, is because he wrote a letter to Golda Meir praising her for how she handled Arab terrorists. Right around the same time, he came out and publicly supported UNITA. John Lewis was the biggest Israeli supporter in the CBC. There's nothing good about that, but it's damn sure troublesome. And this is why Bill Clinton took his white liberal latitude and went to his funeral and said, John Lewis's path is better for African people, not the path that Kwame Ture chose, because he knew that path meant anti-Zionism. He knew that path meant anti-imperialism. He knew that path meant running AFRICOM out of Africa, running the United States Agency for International Development out of Africa. The lines are drawn. We have to choose, but some of you want to act like this is a game of ping pong and go back and forth. One day you're on their side, the next day you're on our side. We're not playing those type of games with you. You have to stand firm on this side. Some of you already have apologies in your back pocket ready to give when you feel your job is in jeopardy, when you feel your status is in jeopardy, when you feel your brand is in jeopardy. That's not going to happen. There's a track record of service dealing with all of these issues that we're talking about. We're going to show the young people the trail of this service so that they can choose the service. And there's a difference between commentary and activity. Activity must be sustained. We are for people having an enhanced understanding of what they're doing so they aren't involved in activity for activity's sake. But at the same time, there are certain things we can't tolerate. We have to be intolerant of the opportunism, and we have to serve, sacrifice, and intensify this resistance. Thank you, brother, for our time. I hope
Africa must be free. Africa must unite. Long live socialism. Long live Fidel. Long live Africa.
Yeah.
Death to imperialism. Death to settler colonialism. We done pulled the cover off. The Palestinians pulled the cover off of settler colonialism. All of them, every European nation have went into other nations in the world, committed genocide on the people, stole their land, put them in slavery, and that's why all of them are in the bed with Israel, because it's another settler colonial nation. Death to settler colonialism. Long live Africa, long live Pan-Africanism.
And I hate to actually interject because this conversation I knew would prolong itself, but I just wanted to, as we close, I just wanted to highlight two things that I think is important to really kind of encapsulate those great particular important historical perspectives. One of them is when you're talking about the use of capital and money as a tool to actually deflate, co-opt movements. This is important. I want people to understand that the genealogy that both of you've laid out, this notion of making sure that people are paying attention to the use of capital, because capital and capital accumulation is part of the imperialist project. It's very important to understand that. And the second thing that I think is important, and please, by all means, you both can, add comments to this, is this organizing, and Brother Obi and Brother Mukasa, you talked about this a little bit. This organizing on multiple fronts becomes important. Cadre development becomes important. And so what I'm talking about here is that being able to understand that there is a continuity between all of these things. Is it a question of the most accurate understanding of the conditions that kind of sharpen the continuities, or is it a question of cadre development to understand the multiple forms also lead to one particular common enemy? I'm mapping back to Malcolm. I'm mapping back to us understanding that particular process. Brother Mukasa, you can comment, and Brother Obi, you can comment, and then we can, and then I hate to say close because I would love to continue the conversation, but please, Brother Mukasa, and then Brother Obi, and then we will just put a pause in the conversation at that particular point. But go ahead.
Well, we got to go out here and fight and organize and fight and teach our people to fight. And that's basically what we have to do. And that we have one objective, total liberation, unification of Africa. And we need to unite the continent of Africa under one. We need to run all the foreign forces off our African continent and all the forces that represent foreign forces on our continent. Uncle Tom, neo-colonial, run them off our continent. And we have to fight for Africa. And so that's basically what it is. And we all, don't care what you're doing, where you are, in the grocery store, in the diamond field, or in the Congo, there's only one enemy, and that's imperialism. Imperialism is all one. And that everything will lead to a fight against imperialism. Every road we take will lead to a fight against imperialism, and it'll lead to African unity.
I'll end by saying thank you so much for the time today. In the past, we've had this concept in the spirit of unity where we talk about coming to the table, but that process has been co-opted and by subjectivity and opportunism. So I don't think that we need to, because when you say come to the table, you're talking about a seat at the table. And that only can take course when we choose collaboration over competition. But you have too many entities out here whose first instinct is to compete. And you can go into the circles of any of the work we do, and people have to regulate that and get that in check. The blockade on Cuba should have been lifted a long time ago, but there's this instinct to compete instead of collaborate. Yes, I said it, and I could prove it too from experience. And the same thing, you find this dynamic consistent. So I would say that we don't sit at the table. We stand at the table, stand around the table, put our work and our labor on the table as organizers. And let's take a look at the results of the work that people do. Look at the work we do in the arts. Look at the work we do in education. Look at the work we do in journalism. Look at the work we do in the church. Look at the work we do with workers. Look at the work we do in Africa. Look at the work we do around the police. Look at the work our women do. Look at the work that everybody does. And let's take a look at the work that makes the most sense, where we're having the most results. And then let's commit ourselves to turning our weaknesses into strengths and expanding on the strengths that we already have. And I think if we take that approach, we will be surprised at the impact that we have. Once again, collaboration over competition. Go to the Wizard of Oz and get some maturity. Many of you damn sure need it. You're too immature to carry out this work. So you need to stop competing, stop attempting to compete with people that you could collaborate with, But let us find the most honest and transparent way to give everybody a chance to put their work on the table so we can look at the results of this work, because we've got some diamonds in the rough out here where people are making some significant impact, but for whatever reason, when it comes time to assemble, they're conveniently excluded or deliberately excluded.
If we can't sit at the table of justice, we'll kick the fucking legs off, said Jim Foreman, 1965 in Montgomery, Alabama.
There you go.
We'll kick the fucking legs off of it. We want justice, freedom, and liberation of every territory in the world. And we support all the liberation movements in the world and all the people that have spoke up and gave their lives to the movements and liberation. We praise them and hear their voice right now. I can hear them right now. I'm hearing voice. I hear Garvey. I hear Sekou Touré. I hear Lumumba. I hear Kwame Nkrumah. I hear Modibo Keita. I hear them all. So their voices are speaking and crying out for liberation and standing next to the hungry and the poor, letting them know that they have done no crime, but the criminals are those who have made you hungry, those who have made you homeless, those who have worked you for nothing for hundreds of years. They're the criminals, and we will fight them until they're dead. Black power.
I want to, again, take the time to thank you both for just sitting here. Again, this conversation can go on all day, probably for a couple of days, but I think the conversation is very important because it's the ideas that we are presenting that leads to the contours of work that can be framed and carried on. Again, thank you both for taking the time. I can't wait to have another conversation to really think together about this moment and the future that we are taking.
Clap, 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 clap. Forever. Forever. Forever.
Yo, and we won't stop rocking till we retire. Since the economy is such in them dire straits, that isn't an option. Our thing is to be currency kings, thoroughbred NYC, burrowbred. We burrow through dirt and crack open cement. These lines were penned while I was semi-bent. The innocent smiles Quinn broke when he shook it. Remind me when my grandma used to say my ways need a brace, cause my ways just seem so crooked. The little black terror, Hannibal Barrel Watcher, Bear Mountain Skater, peace out Premier, take us out with the peep out the transition. The ammunition that we shooting is ambition, and implanted inside every history book. We the crew who travel to every cranny and nook of the free world, freeing girls from the mate, full as hard with hate. I know if I ask her to slide, she move her head back and forth instead of side to side. This be that one to ride to, the one to jump inside of and make love to your mind. I'm like that baby, that Vancouver lady, Amsterdam boy, sent to the earth to ambush your 5.1 radio decks. I revamp cassettes. It's that digital age, my protect your credit card. Plastic, dope on, lasso, rope on, cowboy style. I giddy up, she gets perky like moan and coffee, skin dark like coffee. Get off me, fix the mouth off, and she lost me in the eve of the night. I play the Monte Cristo, skip the disco, we leave in the night. Rules don't apply to thieves in the night. Still hearts like crooked card decks with more effects, showing more money on the budget. You gotta love it. Screams take flight like spaceships ignite. Now count it off. T-minus, reunited after degrees in September. The leaves began rushing the earth. I fell for it. Scores of faces, so we rock the bells for it. Now the horses shouldn't have done me like that. I make sure we got glue for the summer. Make do for the summer. 900 horns, we done blew a new number. Drink the king, I'm holding on to 40s forever. 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 Forever.